population of 130 million people, only 800,000, that is not even 1 million, pay tax. And out of those 800,000, 500,000 are government servants, so that tax is deducted at source. And that comes to only 300,000. And I kept telling my machinery that just take the big cities, Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi, the big cities. And I said, go out there and see if there's a man who has a Land Cruiser. A Land Cruiser costs $200,000 in Pakistan. If he has a Land Cruiser, he should be paying tax. I said, go out and see who has a house that is built on more than 1,000 square yards. I don't know what square yards used here, or 1,000 square yards. I said, if you can afford to have a house on 1,000 square yards, you can afford to be paying tax. But the machinery would not act. And then I said, let's privatize taxation. And when I said, let's privatize taxation, because somebody came up to me with a proposal and said that you give me a market. There was a market in a city called Lahore, and they said, you give me market, and I will sign an agreement with you that I will give you 30 times more revenue than you are presently collecting. So I said, that sounds good. And as soon as I said it, they said, it's corruption. Why aren't you having a tender? Now, in a tender, anybody can come forward. I have no guarantee that they're really going to give me 30 times more or not. Somebody who's come up with the idea, who's been innovative enough, taken the initiative, should be rewarded for their innovation or their initiative. So in Pakistan, it's a lot of gridlock, even if you have ideas, how do you break through? And I think the first thing that we needed, which I wanted to do, I said, in my third year in office, because the first year I thought the bureaucracy is going to do it for me. So in my third year of office, I said, why don't I get university students? Or why don't I get the police? Or why don't I get a team of people together to go house to house and come back and say who's a taxpayer and who's not a taxpayer? And then I introduced something called the national tax number. And I said, everybody must pay the national tax, have a national tax number. And I said, anybody who does not have a national tax number and goes to buy a car, which costs $100,000, will have to pay a 15% as a fine, because that means they have enough money to be paying tax. And I said, anybody who wants to fly to America, which costs about $5,000 round trip, which is a lot of money for Pakistan because we have purchase power parity and all that, I said they should be paying tax. Well, as soon as I went, they changed it, because I had said that if I was buying and I showed my card, I was exempt. So they said that you could buy as long as I showed my card, you'd be exempt. So obviously you're not collecting taxes. So I think what we need to do is have a legislation which is broad-minded, with the opposition and the government equally represented. And I think what we need to do is crack down on people who are living so overtly, ostentatiously. I mean, it's really sickening that one has so much poverty on one side, and then we have so much affluence on the other side, and we have only 800,000 taxpayers. I mean, have affluence. I'm one of those people, I say, if you work hard, it's your money. Do what you want with it. But pay your dues. And if you pay your dues, I have no problem.
Do you believe it's possible for women to attain equality in the Muslim world? And what do you foresee for women's rights in Pakistan? You've obviously done a lot to advance the cause of women in your country.
I think Pakistan is today absolutely a different country from before it was when I became Prime Minister. Not because I think my victory was a victory not only for my party, but it was a victory for working women in Pakistan. Before, Pakistani women could become air hostesses, but they couldn't really work, or nurses. I mean, these were the two jobs for women. Now suddenly, ever since we opened the Women's Bank, we have women running bakeries, we have women running boutiques, women running exercise parlors and beauty salons, and we have a proliferation, furniture shops. I mean, you'd be surprised, the furniture shop market is dominated today by Pakistani women. So a lot of urban women are coming out and working in Pakistan. But you know, there's a big resentment against it. I found that even as women work, it's resented very strongly by men. And I found that resentment all along. I found it with ordinary people. And I couldn't, I mean, my supporters were fine, but you know, like my supporters are about 37% of the population normally. So that means 73% of the population does not agree with what we are doing. And that makes me feel very sad. You know, like when we started recruiting the 100,000 lady health workers, everybody said, oh, where are you going to get the women from? They're not women. And then they're always putting down women. In terms of jobs, women are being put down. In terms of promotion, women are being put down. And women have to work longer hours and harder hours to prove that they're equal to a man. And when my government was overthrown, I found the people who were targeted were the women. I mean, you'll be surprised to know that I had a managing director of the Pakistan television who was a lady. She's been put on an exit control list. She's not been allowed to leave the country. Her husband is a diplomat. He hasn't been given a posting. I had a secretary of women's development who negotiated Pakistan's admission, the signing of CEDAW at the Beijing conference on women, and they instituted a case against her and made that poor woman go from city to city and courtroom to courtroom with lawyers. She was not a rich woman. She had to spend money hiring lawyers to try and get her from one place to another. Then I had a social sector secretary called Shanaz Wazir Ali. She was opened up for investigations. And then, do you believe my hairdresser was also put on the list for investigations? I was horrified when I went to her. So this, when women are obviously made a target of victimization, then this discourages women from working. So in Pakistan, although women have made many gains, we have not overcome prejudice in men, and we have not even overcome prejudice in many women. Now I'll tell you something surprising, that it's not only men who are against women, but the painful part is that often women are against women. And we'll have people who are, whose sons are getting married, and they'll say, I don't want that as a daughter-in-law. She's a working woman. She's going to neglect your house. She's going to neglect your children. She's not going to take care. So, you know, it seems a very strange battle that women fight, and sometimes a very lonely battle, because one would expect that men in traditional roles would oppose a woman, but it's also women who sometimes oppose, and I think the opposition from women is more hurtful.
I was curious. Okay, I was curious how you think that the repealment of the 8th Amendment will affect the stability of the government in Pakistan.
I think the repeal of the 8th Amendment was a very big moral vindication for us, because really it was my party that had been the victim of the 8th Amendment. The last party had been restored to power and resigned. But I don't think the government in Pakistan is very stable, even though they have a 90% majority in parliament, but it's a majority that the election commission says took place. There have already been riots in different parts of the country. The law and order situation has deteriorated, and the country is heading towards a financial collapse. I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, and I said the government and the opposition should really get together to discuss the issue of corruption, because it's become a very important political issue in Pakistan. The reason that it's become an important political issue is that people feel that unemployment and inflation will go if corruption goes. Now, obviously, eliminating corruption will give some dividends, but unemployment and inflation will go only when we deal with demography and debt. And the Prime Minister has not yet responded, and that's why I said I also wish you good luck, because I know that the situation is that there are certain forces which are very militant, and they want democracy to fail, and they want a pluralistic system to fail, and they want to say we've had Benazir twice and we've had Nawaz Sharif twice, and both of them were corrupt, and there was unemployment in both times, and there was inflation in most times. Because the Prime Minister comes from the majority province of the Punjab, I think he has a 50% chance of surviving. But the odds are heavily weighted against him. And I think it will only be by April 1998 that we will know whether Pakistan has got political stability or not. Because I think that if he crosses into 1998, then we will enter a period of relative stability.
Due to the time constraints, this will be the last question.
I wanted to ask about if you can care to comment on the general lack of economic development that has taken place in Pakistan and in India. A lot of people will say that maybe these countries have failed to advance because of Cold War politics, because of huge populations, and all these other conflicts that have taken place, and the lack of democracy. But you know, I give you South Korea, that was the greatest scene of the Cold War conflict. Indonesia has a large population. Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, all of these countries have had, I mean, they've not been the most open or democratic societies, yet the living standards, the poverty has been taken away in such, over the last 50 years, it's an economic miracle. Why has this not happened in Pakistan, maybe in India? Would you care to comment on that?
Well, I can't answer for India, but I can tell you that Pakistan had tremendous amounts of foreign and military assistance, foreign military and economic assistance, and that was a real window of opportunity for us. But unfortunately, because the economic assistance we got and the military assistance we got was during the period of military dictatorship, there was a neglect of the social indicators. Money didn't go in for education, it didn't go in for health, it didn't go in for childcare, it didn't go in for the dignity of women. So if we have a workforce that is poorly trained, that is poorly educated, and that is largely malnourished and therefore prone to falling ill, obviously our economy is not going to grow. Now the days of dictatorship are over, but the days of foreign military and economic assistance are also over. So the bonanza years are over, and we are finding it difficult to deal with the situation, because now we have to buy planes, whereas we got them first in assistance. Now we have to buy wheat, although first we got it free in assistance. But if I look at Indonesia and Korea, I don't know about Korea, if I look at Indonesia, I think they were able to put their political disputes on the back burner. India and Pakistan were not able to put their political disputes.
Not yet.
Not yet. So maybe one of the reasons that they developed economically was because they put the political disputes on the back burner, and we didn't. So we spent too much than we would otherwise on keeping an alert, a defense alertness. But I think that the primary reason that Pakistan stayed backward was a lack of human resource development. And I think even today people don't understand the importance of human resource development. I think even today they're paying too little attention to sewerage, drainage, education, health, and technological training. We have people who come out with degrees in geography and history. But in Pakistan, we have to import labor for carpentry, for mechanics, for stone cutting, and for the services industry. So we've got to understand the market, and we've got to try and train our people to meet the demands of the market. Could you answer that question and help me out on why the others have done so well and we haven't?
Well, in terms of South Asian politics, I think the hostility between India and Pakistan is a major factor. I mean, I wish the subcontinent would never have been partitioned. I can visualize, well, Madam Prime Minister, then you would have been the
Prime Minister. Heart attack, so don't worry, that wasn't.
Then you would have been the Prime Minister of India.
Oh dear, I'm sorry I asked you to answer that. You can take it back.
Well, the hour went by very fast. I still see there are so many hands, and the Prime Minister perhaps will be willing to answer all the questions, but our plane leaves at about 2:40, and we have to go for lunch. I would like to thank the Prime Minister from the bottom of our hearts to take the time, and I know that you have traveled all the way from Pakistan, and I'm sure that during this hour you have converted many more hearts, and there will be many students coming to me tomorrow and the next week and asking me if there's a possibility that they would be going to Pakistan, if not to India. Thank you very much. In the South Asian tradition, I will say namaskar.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. It's very nice. you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.